Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, whoops, my mistake. I left something turned on I shouldn't have. There's too many buttons in this little room here. Anyway, it is Tuesday, October 8th, 2013, the 8th day of the government shutdown, except it's not really shut down. They've shut down a few highly visible things to try and scare Americans into agreeing to saddle future generations with even more debt than we're dealing with ourselves. But most of the government is up and running just fine. The Pentagon's back to work, out there showering white-hot flaming death on innocent people around the world because that's what makes America great. So it's all theater. It's all for show. Now, today, a reminder, in our third hour, Donna Laframboise is going to be on the air with us talking about her new book, looking into the inside of the IPCC, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. As we know, just recently they came out with a new report that basically said, all right, there's no warming, but we're still convinced that in the long run we're right. And then, of course, the Dakotas got hit with a record-setting snowstorm, and the corporate media is out there saying because of global warming it's going to melt, there's going to be floods. They're still trying to push that whole thing to get you to buy carbon taxes, buy carbon credits and pay carbon taxes. It's just a giant cash grab. This government is so desperate for your money. They're still trying to ride this global warming thing to get more of your money from you, just like Obamacare is just another cash grab. And the failure of that policy rests on a very simple fact. We, the American people, don't have any more to give. We are tapped out. Because everybody inside Wall Street and Washington, D.C. is thinking about how they can take more money away from the American people, and nobody was out there thinking about how to revive the economy so that Americans could trade their labor for a decent salary or wage with which to pay these increasing demands. So it's just complete nonsense. And, of course, we're coming up here on the end of the week with this truckers' strike on the eastern seaboard. Apparently the day before they're going to be up in Pennsylvania. Just sort of pulling this thing together. The truckers are going to be in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. Apparently the bikers are going to be riding alongside in support and solidarity. There are going to be banners on the freeways calling for impeachment. Veterans are descending on World War II in outrage over the closure of the World War II memorial and the treatment of those World War II veterans. So this whole shutdown theater has definitely flashed back on the government. If they thought by taking away our national parks and our monuments and shutting off the social services at the same time they're continuing to shower money all over Wall Street and the war machine in Israel, that we were just going to say, all right, we'll let you put more debt on our children if you'll just give us back our national monuments. And if they thought that was going to work, obviously it did not. Another reason to suspect that a lot of people inside the Beltway are on those SSRIs because they're not thinking very clearly. They're just out there looking for somewhere they can take more money away from the American people, and we do not have it. That is why this is all going to fail ultimately. Now, over the weekend, we were talking about this yesterday, the United States government, meaning Obama, staged a couple of raids into Libya and Somalia, attempting to capture terrorist kingpins. So they could wave that all over the news this week and distract us away from all the problems with Obamacare and the budgetary problems and the fact that all of this staged theater regarding the national monuments and national parks had backfired horribly. So they needed a distraction. So they sent these two groups in. Apparently, the SEAL team that went into Somalia got their rear ends kicked. They're trying to say that they withdrew from the mission out of concern for civilian casualties, which is complete nonsense. Civilian casualties have never been a factor in American military planning. You can tell that from the drone strikes that kill an average of 50 innocent bystanders for every one terror suspect they think they got. So Somalia was a complete write-off. And they've been making a big deal about how they captured Anas al-Libi, the terrorist mastermind behind the 1998 bombing of the embassy, and they're interrogating him and they're waterboarding him and all the rest of that stuff. There's only two problems with that story. And you're not going to hear this on the corporate media because they're trying to pump this thing up. Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda. Anas al-Libi was actually captured back in 2002. And according to the family of the man the SEALs actually grabbed, he's not a terror mastermind, he's a pizza cook. He works in a pizza kitchen. He makes pizza. That's what he does. So along with this disaster in Somalia, Obama's attempt to distract Americans with heroic strikes against terrorist masterminds right now is running 0 for 2. It's an epic fail, another epic fail, just like when Obama tried to claim that they got Osama bin Laden in May of 2011, even though we all know the real Osama bin Laden actually died of natural causes in December 2001, and every bin Laden since then was a manufactured fake. Some of them, you can even look on the picture and see the obvious signs where they glued the beard on. And, of course, when that last hoax began to fail, they flooded the Internet with these very badly done fake photos that were quickly exposed by a certain blacklisted visual effects supervisor living in Hawaii. And then they said, we will release no more pictures out of respect to the dead guy whose body we just dumped in the ocean. Now, today on the corporate media, they're fanning all this stuff about how Al-Qaeda will carry out reprisal terror attacks against Americans. They're going to kidnap Americans and hold them hostage to trade for this pizza cook. And this feels like more of this run-up to a new false flag attack to try and reignite the war on terror. And the corporate media today, they're already linking this guy that they caught, the pizza cook, with Iran and Syria and nuclear weapons, and they're just fanning this thing as hard as they can. And it's all complete USDA choice bovine excrement, except, of course, the USDA inspectors are on furlough. Now, Libya, their new installed government, now remember, Libya's government is the government because of the U.S. intervention that killed Gaddafi, tore down their state central bank, got rid of the gold dinar, put a brand new private central bank, loaning the public currency at interest, and putting in this puppet regime. And the puppet regime is now angry and saying that the U.S. action into Libya has just fanned up the resentment by the Libyan people against their U.S. puppet government. They've made things worse. The country's economy has practically ground to a halt under this covert U.S. rule. But, of course, from the point of view of the White House, hey, they got that gold dinar, and that makes it all worthwhile. So, anyway, Kerry is already out there trying to defend the U.S. actions in Libya, saying it's legal. He says, you shouldn't criticize us. This was perfectly legal. Of course, he won't say under what law he claims this is legal, because it isn't. When you send armed military into another country without their knowledge and permission, that is an act of war. And Kerry can get up there and say it's all perfectly legal under all these rules we just now made up, but under international law, no, it is not legal. It was a desperation play. They needed a victory in the war on terror in order to take people's minds off Obamacare and the budget and economy problems, which are not getting any better no matter what they do. Because when you are drowning in debt, borrowing more money is not a solution. It's just kicking the problem further down the road and letting other people clean up the mess. And we have had 100 years of that. And look at what this private central banking scam has done to the United States over the last 100 years. And yes, we had a wonderful, glorious time in the wake of World War II because Bretton Woods was siphoning wealth out of other countries and bringing it here. And that's now all falling apart because the rest of the world is sick and tired of the U.S. Federal Reserve getting a piece of the action of every commerce on the planet. The U.S. government, that Federal Reserve, they're acting like a mafia crime factory. They're going out to everybody and saying, no matter what you're doing, what you're selling, we get a piece of the action. If you don't give us a piece of the action, something bad going to happen to you. We're going to drop drones on you. We're going to drop bombs on you. So you just give it a piece of the action. And that's what that whole scam is, because when the entire world is using that U.S. dollar for commerce and banking, where do those dollars come from? They are borrowed at interest from the Federal Reserve. And that's why people around the world, including the United States, are all fed up with this nonsense. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And President Obama is now on the air. He was supposed to start at the top of the hour. As usual, he delayed for 10 minutes to build the suspense and the anticipation for what he was going to say. And he's basically out there saying it's all the fault of the Republicans and the GOP, and they're being unreasonable, and blah, 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 blah. In other words, it's a complete waste of bandwidth as far as I'm concerned. So, moving right along here. Again, these two raids by the SEALs into Libya and Somalia have turned out to be a major public relations debacle, because the SEALs actually had to retreat from Somalia. Now, the cover story is they were concerned about civilian casualties, which doesn't make any sense, but apparently there is a video of the raid that did surface, which basically showed that one of the al-Shabaab fighters walked out to smoke a cigarette and appeared to go back inside without having noticed the SEALs were there, but apparently he did, because immediately al-Shabaab came out and opened fire on the SEALs before they could even move, and that's why they were running. They lost the element of surprise. And now, of course, they're still trying to hype that they got this terror suspect from 1998, except that the real guy was arrested in 2002, and as far as anybody can tell, the man they've actually got being waterboarded right now is a pizza chef. And I'm sure by now, under all that waterboarding, he has revealed his secret ingredients for his pizza. But they're not going to get much else with him. Anyway, Obama is out there saying, we've got to move forward. The GOP has got to do it my way. He's refusing to back off on Obamacare, and we know why. We talked about that yesterday. Obamacare is going to generate billions in immediate tax revenues for the U.S. government, between taxing the out-of-control wild profits of the health insurance companies that are part of this scam, or all these IRS fines that are going on to anybody who can't or won't sign up. And Obama needs that increase in tax revenues in order so that when the debt ceiling is raised, they'll be able to find lenders who will actually loan the U.S. money, because they can raise the debt ceiling all the way to the sky. That doesn't solve the problem unless somebody somewhere is willing to loan the U.S. some money. And yes, they can go to the Federal Reserve, and probably will, because they have been, but every time the Federal Reserve just creates up new money out of thin air to loan to the government, it creates inflationary pressure on the dollar, and the dollar is already in trouble around the world. So they're really between a rock and a hard place. And there's a part of the shutdown that you need to understand. We've already documented that only 6% of the federal workforce was caught up in the shutdown, and now it's down to 3% because the Pentagon people have gone back to work. But what has not been shut down is the interest accruing on the already existing U.S. national debt, which officially is hovering somewhere between 16 and 17 trillion, and unofficially is now recognized to be $220 trillion. And the interest on that continues to mature. Now, there's another problem as well, and this goes back to the Clinton administration, where Clinton, in part of his looting Social Security and restructuring to try and make the federal budget look like it had a surplus, is he transformed a lot of the long-term U.S. debt into shorter-term U.S. debt that charges a higher interest. And because of other short-sighted maneuvers between Clinton and the President administration, there is $440 billion in U.S. government debt that is maturing before the middle of next month, November 15th. Now, by maturing means those bonds come due and must be paid in full, principal and accrued interest. And they don't have the cash for that. Now, they're hoping that they'll convince everybody to simply roll those bonds over and come back in. But it's always up to the lenders. At any point, these people holding these bonds, as they mature, instead of rolling them over, they'll say, we're going to cash out. And there's nothing the U.S. government can do to stop them, unless they're phoning foreign governments up in the middle of the night and saying, if you don't roll over the bonds, we'll nuke you, and blame Iran for it. Meanwhile, the media is out there spinning a new approach in which the United States Department of the Treasury needs to prioritize payments to bondholders. In other words, it's sort of a cagey way of the U.S. government going into default, but not admitting they've gone into default. And by the way, all this talk about this will be the first time in our history. No, the U.S. government has in fact defaulted several times before in history, and it wasn't the end of the world. It was just a huge political embarrassment for the government. Now, the Treasury is already saying this prioritized payments approach is not going to work, because it doesn't matter who you're paying, the ones you're not paying are going to stand up and say, you've defaulted. I've got credit default swaps against your debt. So it's an absolute, complete nonsense. And by the way, the U.S. government is already in default to you, the American people, specifically those of you on Social Security. because the government has been borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund, going back to the Clinton administration, to balance the books. They've been taking your cash out of that trust fund and replacing it with Treasury bonds, which they cannot redeem. What the government did is they looked around and said, we can't make all of our payments. Who can we default on that can't fight back? Well, we can't default on the Federal Reserve. They'll foreclose. We can't default on those foreign banks. You know, that'll cause all kinds of problems. It'll harm our credit rating and the reputation of Wall Street. But we can default on the Social Security recipients because, hey, there's nothing they can do. Now, during this shutdown, and again, we're looking at an Obama administration that has orchestrated this shutdown to be as painful as possible to you, the American people, in order to coerce you into simply accepting without question this increase in the total debt being carried by the American people, assigned to you by the federal government. Of course, they're going to borrow and spend. They're not paying it back. They get the credit card, you get the credit card bill, and they just love it that way. Apparently, death benefits to families of U.S. forces killed in action in all these wars have now stopped. It's hoped that these families will start calling their congressmen and, raise the debt ceiling. We need our money to live on. But I don't think that's going to be the reaction that they're going to get. And right now, I think Obama is taking a huge, huge risk angering the veterans and their families at this particular time here. Now, as I mentioned before, the Social Security Administration is out there warning that it cannot guarantee full benefit payments if the debt ceiling isn't increased. Oh, really? Why? Social Security is a trust fund. American workers pay into it their entire lives through payroll deductions. Social Security payments are supposed to come from that fund that is funded by the American worker. Social Security shouldn't need an increase in the debt ceiling unless all that money went away. And as I mentioned before, starting with the Clinton administration, the government borrowed that cash in Social Security, replacing it with Treasury bonds the U.S. government can't redeem. Now, because the U.S. government cannot redeem those Treasury bonds in the Social Security Trust Fund, the U.S. government is in default to you, the American worker. The American worker's money is gone. The U.S. government has effectively embezzled your retirement money to pay their other bills. And by saying that they must now borrow to replace the looted cash, the U.S. government is expecting future workers to pay for Social Security benefits for you that you already paid for once, plus the accruing interest. In other words, they're double billing the people. The U.S. government is selling you an apple, and they're charging you for 2 apples, and trying to pretend that this is wise fiscal management of the people's retirement funds. And, of course, it isn't. It absolutely isn't. So, as we head closer to that October 17th deadline, at which point the U.S. is going to run out of cash in theory, Obama is already prioritizing what's going to get shut down, what are we not going to be able to pay for, and of course it's going to be all the things to take care of you. They're not touching the money for Israel, they're not touching the money for the war machine, they're not touching the money for Wall Street. You're on the bottom of their list of priorities, and you should be angry. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the government shutdown and how the Obama administration has gone out and ordered the shutdown of those things that he feels will have the maximum psychological impact on the American people. And there is a problem with that, because under the Constitution, only Congress has the authority to decide what to pay for and, if necessary, what not to pay for. So once again, we have Obama out there playing politics and exceeding his authority as president. Now, we already know the Pentagon workers have been put back to work at the Pentagon to send white-hot flaming death onto anybody who refuses to run their economy to serve the American empire. And we know that all of these furloughed government workers are going to receive all of their back pay. So the idea that these shutdowns are to cut costs just went out the window. They're spending the same money. In fact, in some cases, like all the police who are over there at the Veterans Memorial and the police who are preventing people from parking by the side of the road in front of Mount Rushmore, they're actually spending more money to go through this theater of a shutdown than they would have spent had they just left everything open. It's all theater. It's all propaganda to get you to go along with condemning our future generations of Americans to greater and greater debt slavery. And that's all it is. Now, if you really wanted to cut costs, let's look at that military, because the U.S. spends more on the machinery of death than the next 26 nations combined, 25 of whom are allies. And much of it is hideous waste. There's a story that even Fox News covered this thing. The Pentagon is buying these $50 million apiece cargo planes, not from an American manufacturer. They're not even creating jobs with this money. They're buying them from Italy. These Italian-built C-27J Spartan cargo planes are being bought from Italy and sent right into the boneyard for storage because nobody wants them. And they go right from the factory into the boneyard mothball fleet because nobody wants them. And they sit out in the desert and they corrode away, and then they're broken up for scrap. Just like the U.S. is buying helicopters from the Russians to give to Afghanistan, and those Afghanis can't even fly the things. Huge amounts of waste. Out there at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, there are 4,400 aircraft and 13 aerospace vehicles. A total value of $35 billion sitting there unused, and probably soon will be unusable. This is a repeat of that scandal we reported on before regarding two ships, the Benjamin Isherwood and the Henry Eckford. These were Navy refueling ships that cost the U.S. taxpayer $300 million. And they were sent right from the construction yard to the scrap yard without serving a day at sea. But the government is going to save money by closing the national parks and the national monuments. Now, there's another story, and this is going to have international repercussions, because there was a group of seniors, a foreign tour coming to the United States to see Yellowstone. And they were on a bus tour to tour around Yellowstone, and of course they came up against the gate saying they were closed, and rather than just turn the bus around, these senior citizens from Japan, Australia, and Canada, and some Americans were basically locked into a National Yellowstone Park hotel under armed guard and kept there. And now we have this story where apparently a lot of these park rangers have now gone public, saying that they received instructions, specific instructions, from the Obama administration to make life as difficult as possible for visitors during the shutdown. Not just turning them away, but harassing them, going through their cars. Like I said a little while ago, over at Mount Rushmore, the parking lots are obviously closed, and so people just wanted to pull over by the side of the highway and take a picture. They have police there to make sure nobody stops and takes a picture of Mount Rushmore. It's all theater, it's all propaganda, and it's all across the country. Apparently up in New York City, veterans gathered at the Vietnam Memorial Plaza to protest the 12th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan, and the police showed up and arrested them, throwing these veterans who served their country in uniform into paddy wagons and taking them away. How much money are they spending to do that? Certainly a lot more than if they just let the veterans show up at the plaza, have their little memorial service, and go home. And all of this stuff is backflashing. Now, of course, the FDA and the USDA are mostly shut down, and by an amazing coincidence, we're getting a salmonella outbreak in chicken across the country. See, you need us. You need us. And maybe the providers of this food figured that without the inspectors, they could get by with less than perfect product. Maybe. But do you remember the ABC Food Lion scandal? ABC TV, as a favor to the Supermarket Workers Union, infiltrated the Food Lion supermarket, had a couple of their producers get jobs as food handlers, and faked evidence of unsanitary food handling at Food Lion to basically destroy them because they refused to capitulate to union demands. And it was exposed. The courts found the tape showing these ABC producers deliberately dropping food on the ground and then picking it up and putting it back into the packages. And it was all staged and faked. Now, with Obama desperate to coerce you, the American people, into demanding Congress pass a debt ceiling increase and leave Obamacare untouched, and with the closures of the national parks clearly backfiring, I would not put it past the U.S. government to deliberately cause a salmonella outbreak, to scare Americans into agreeing to higher debts. Please bring back our food inspectors. We want our food to be safe. Not that it's that safe anyway, even with the inspectors there. Apparently somebody just did a research on the chicken nuggets sold by a major fast food chain who will remain nameless because they got a bunch of mean drunks for a law firm, and found out they're less than 50% actual chicken meat. And the rest of it is just stuff from the chickens that normally you would just throw out, but they grind it up, fill it in there. And here's the final slap in the face. After kicking the veterans of World War II out of their own World War II memorial, and then kicking the Vietnam veterans out from the Vietnam Memorial, the Obama administration allowed an immigration amnesty rally on the National Mall, which is supposed to be closed because it's under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. But no, we're pushing the immigration amnesty agenda, so we're just, come on in. And they had video on it on the corporate media, just a huge crowd there. It's okay for them to use these public properties. They're not, most of them aren't even citizens. Now, being a mean cuss in my old age, if I'd been in Washington, D.C., I would have gotten like 20, 30 of my buddies, gone over to a Halloween costume rental company and rented some immigration officer uniforms and run into the plaza going, immigration raid, immigration raid, immigration raid. But seriously, if they wanted to deal with the illegal immigration problem, what a wonderful opportunity they had there. They had a huge chunk of them all in one place. Should have thrown up the chain link and said, all right, you're all going back where you came from. But what a slap in the face to the World War II veterans and the Vietnam veterans who were told they could not visit their own monuments to their own achievements and sacrifice, but the illegal immigrants just got complete access to the National Mall. That is just shameful, and it underscores the fact that Obama is picking and choosing the shutdowns to inflict the maximum pain and psychological trauma on the American people, to propagandize us into going along with condemning our children and grandchildren to ever more massive debt to get back what really belongs to us in the first place. Those national monuments, those national parks, those public properties, they belong to the people. The government is the janitor we hire to take care of them. And because the janitor can't or won't do their job does not give the government the authority to say that we are not allowed into our public properties. It's just all theater and propaganda. Let's see, Obama's still on the air, and he's still out there saying it's all the fault of the GOP. We've got to pass this debt increase. Why? Why are we even talking about raising the debt ceiling? Why, when the Constitution gives this government the authority to create and issue an interest-free public currency, is this government going to a privately owned bank to borrow that currency at interest, thereby creating this debt that is enslaving the American people? Why are they doing that? They don't want you to ask that question because they don't have a good answer. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. When we're basically seeing a government in the throes of trying to grab anything it can to keep this little Ponzi scheme, pyramid-based private central bank going a little bit further, and they are getting desperate, and not just here in the United States, all over the world. Greece is now considering confiscation of private assets to prop up their portion of the private central bank called the European Central Bank. We saw it in Cyprus. Now they're getting ready to do it in Greece. They're calling it a bail-in or a haircut or a scalping or a castration or whatever you want to call it. But it basically amounts to the banks being granted the authority by their lordships to go out and just take your property. To just take your property, to take your wealth, to cover the fact that the pyramid scheme is starting to collapse. And they're establishing this as a precedent. They started in Cyprus and said, well, yeah, we were able to do it in Cyprus, and Cyprus didn't hang their government, as they probably should have. Now we'll do it in Greece. It's already written into the financial plan for Canada for next year. They're already writing it in and trying to sell you the idea that this is perfectly okay, that if you are one of those few people who actually has money in a savings account, that they can just take it. And they'll give you a little piece of paper saying, we, the bank, promise we'll replace it somewhere down the road, which they're not going to be able to do because it's a pyramid scheme, and all pyramids collapse. And that's where we are right now. And, of course, our common sense advice we give to all of our listeners and all of our readers, you should have no more money in the bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations. You should have the rest at home as cash or as physical silver and gold, hidden under your mattress, buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation, wherever. But have it under your own control. Because when things start to unravel, those ATM machines are going to shut down. That's part of the FEMA emergency executive orders that have already been written. When the president declares an economic national emergency, the banks are just going to close the doors and say, sorry, we don't have to give you anything. The president said we can keep and use your money. They even have laws on the books already to go into your safety deposit boxes to look for items of value, which is why you shouldn't be keeping your physical silver and gold in your safety deposit boxes. The only thing, we used to have a safety deposit box, we just kept data backups in it. But I mean, it's spreading across the globe. This global Ponzi scheme, private central banking scam is collapsing globally. And their entire mentality is, well, you, the people out there, your entire purpose is to support our little banking system. And if you won't do so voluntarily, we're just going to have to entitle ourselves to go into your savings account and empty those out, to go into your safety deposit boxes and empty those out, because the safety, the reputation and trustworthiness of the banks must be maintained at all costs, up to and including a new world war. Now, let's talk about Obamacare. The White House is already thrashing around trying to find some way they can paper over the fact that this enrollment system has turned into a gigantic Charlie Foxtrot. We're seeing numbers come in. Apparently, just 1% of the Obamacare requests have been successfully processed. The other 99% vanished into this database system and cannot be retrieved. So even those people who think they have enrolled have not enrolled. This system was nowhere ready for deployment. And even the programmers who wrote it were saying that 2 weeks ago. This is not close to being ready. But Obama said, it will go now because I, his Obamaness, have said so. And we are not amused at the problems. And it simply is not working, and it's turning into a major, major disaster. I think that's why Obama is sending the SEAL teams out there to catch terror masterminds as a distraction, except that that has backflashed on him. He's still on TV talking about, how it's all the Republicans' fault that the economy is in such a huge mess. And we, the American people, know better than that. We ran a poll on our website yesterday where the overwhelming response was it's both parties and Wall Street are all equally guilty for wrecking what used to be the greatest nation on earth. And Obama is pushing for Obamacare to move forward. He doesn't care if it actually gets you health insurance. He doesn't care if it actually makes the population healthier, because if this government actually cared about your health, they'd be getting on the problem of toxic vaccine adjuvants and the adverse health effects of GMO technology. But they don't care about that. It makes money, therefore it is good. And Obamacare, along with carbon taxes, it's just another cash grab scam to keep this failed economic system propped up a little bit longer. And it's not going to work because we, the American people, are tapped out. We don't have the money to pay into this new, more costly insurance system. We don't have the money to pay carbon taxes. And we know it's all based on a fraud, but Obama can't wait. When Congress finally raises the debt ceiling, and you know they will, that's only half the problem. Obama's got to go out and convince somebody to actually loan real wealth to this nation. Because they can't just keep going back to the Federal Reserve for instantly created money. We're going to wind up in Zimbabwe territory. carrying around pieces of paper that say $100 trillion on them, and that will definitely be the end of Bretton Woods. So that's why he's desperate to get it going now. He doesn't care about health insurance. All he cares about is the expected $200 billion a year in added tax revenues that they can show to potential lenders to say, see, we can make the new interest payments. We've got all this money coming in. Treasury Secretary Lew is refusing to say how many people have actually signed up for Obamacare. And we know the reason for that are the reports that we are getting in from the various state exchanges that show single-digit sign-ups, 1%, 5%. People are going in there, filling out the information. They look at the offered insurance packages. They're costly. The deductibles are through the roof. And they're saying, this is nonsense. This is absolutely worthless to me. Because for most Americans, we're talking about that one that we saw on Facebook the other day, $500 a month in premiums and a $14,000 deductible, which means the vast majority of Americans will be paying $6,000 a year for an insurance policy that is not actually, over the course of a year, going to pay for any of their medical care. So all that money going into the health insurance companies is pure profit, over $1 trillion estimated, and the government gets their piece of the action. It's just another grab for the money. Now, last night, Jon Stewart, who has at least tacitly supported Obamacare, ripped into the Secretary of Health and Human Services about all the problems they're having and why businesses are allowed to opt out for a year, but individuals are not. And Sebelius sits there and says, oh, you can delay your Obamacare for a year as long as you're willing to pay that fine. Now, remember, the legitimate function of taxes is to raise revenue for the government. It was never intended under the Constitution for taxes to be used to coerce social compliance. And yet that is exactly what they're doing. And again, they don't care if you sign up for insurance or you pay the fine. All they care about is getting the money. They are desperate. They're right at the edge of a complete fiscal collapse. And they're out there screaming, we can't let this happen, it will destroy the entire world. Well, unfortunately, most of the rest of the world has already turned their back and delinked from the American dollar. So when the American dollar implodes, it will cause difficulties around the world, but nowhere near what's going to happen here. It's going to bring the whole system crashing down, and we have got to be ready to survive a short period of confusion and upheaval, and we have to decide for ourselves what the next government of this land will be, because there's going to be no end of carpetbaggers, well-funded and supported by those same private central banking money junkies to sell us back into the private central banking scam all over again. Got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And I'm getting a lot of emails complaining about this, so I figure I got to mention it. Yes, the RBN streams for my show are not working right now. Apparently, just before I went on the air, the server load went right through the roof, and it appears that we may be under a denial of service attack by somebody who does not want America listening to what RBN has to say. But in the case of my own show, of course, once my program is over, the podcast will be available at RBN, at TuneIn, at iTunes, and of course, I keep podcasts for the previous day's show at my website, and you can basically tell your friends that they can come in and look at it there. Al Jazeera America did an interview of a man who was an Obama supporter and an Obamacare supporter, and when he tried to sign up, discovered that the Obamacare compliant health insurance was $10,000 more than what he had been paying before Obamacare. And so now he's pulling back and saying, I can't support this. And this article has a lot of other examples where people are trying to enroll, and those few who are succeeding are being presented with new insurance policies that charge more and provide less than what they had before. It is a cash grab. All right, we're going to take a couple of phone calls here. Frank in Michigan. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. We were talking about the medical test for gay people to get into get into Arab countries, right?
Right. That sounds to me like propaganda, to, bad Arab countries. I mean, there's a story out of Pakistan this morning about how the Muslims, in response to that previous church attack, the Muslims are forming human chains around the Christian churches to keep them safe, but you're not going to see that on American corporate media because they're out there saying Muslims are bad, Muslims are evil, Muslims are not allowed to wear blue jeans,
Keep them safe from whom? Gay people?
Yeah. Anyway, what's on your mind?
Listen, I was thinking about calling the Saudi Arabia embassy and asking him, could you please tell me what the medical test is to get into your country to see if you're gay, because I'd like to sort of prepare for it. There used to be a time when you can call the Israeli embassy and actually talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 4 or 5 years ago. I used to call them to complain about their treatment of the Palestinians, and I actually got through to some fairly high-level people. Now when you call the Israeli embassy, you just get this machine. You can't leave your message, You won't get near a live person, right?
Right.
But anyway, just call to say hello and hope your phone situation gets cleared up.
Well, it's not phone. It's the streaming feed that goes from RBN out over the internet. We're still.
Oh, you're under attack, right?
Well, we don't know, but from what they're telling me, apparently our streaming server load just shot right through the roof just before my show began, and I've got a 5-cent bet with Manny in the control room that right after my broadcast is over, the problem will go away.
Right. That sounds like an attack to me, right?
Yep.
Well, good luck. And we'll be talking to you.
All right, you got it. We're going to switch over to Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Aloha.
Aloha.
I've got a question, and I know you might not be able to answer it, but maybe someone in your audience might be able to do that. My wife and I are both on Social Security, and we have Medicare, and we pay for Part B on our insurance, and hers is $305 a month, and mine is, this is total, and mine is $316.50 a month, and that's for our prescriptions. And I'm wondering if that's because I've listened to people that saying their insurance is $500 now; it's going to $1,200, and the deductible has gone from $3,000 to $14,000. Will this happen to people like us that are on Social Security, Medicare, and our subsidiary insurance?
I honestly do not know, but I would almost expect that, yes, they're going to hit everyone because, again, the whole reason for higher premiums and higher deductibles is to increase profitability to the health insurance corporations who basically wrote this Affordable Care Act, and, of course, the government goes along with it because they're expecting a windfall in tax revenues from all that profit. And they're getting their piece of the action, and right now this government is desperate for any new tax revenues with which to justify increased borrowing to keep the system going a little bit longer.
Well, I just got my new coupon books for 12 months, and they've increased all my payments, but I'm wondering if they're going to cancel them and send us new books. And that's just my question, if maybe someone can tell me. I guess with our fixed income, we'd just have to do without insurance and lay in the street.
Then the IRS would come in and they'd start fining you for non-compliance with.
I guess what we have to do is sell the house and then rent a mobile home and put the money under the cushion,
Yeah, that would probably be a really good idea to do. But at some point, I'm expecting that as the economy continues to collapse, in addition to seizing money from bank accounts and safety deposit boxes, they'll start kicking down doors of people that they know have purchased significant amounts of gold because they started tracking gold purchases by American citizens a couple of years ago, which is why if you're going to buy silver and gold, go often and buy small amounts, because if you buy a big chunk of it, the government already has a record that you're in possession of that. They're registering gold more successfully than they are registering guns.
Well, thank you, Michael.
All right, you're welcome. We're already hearing stories from all across the country where people who've already got health insurance are getting notices that their premiums are going up and deductibles are going up to bring them in compliance with Obamacare. Other people are being notified by their insurance companies that their current policy is being canceled for being non-compliant, and then they're presented with 3 or 4 new policies, all of which are much more expensive, all of which have much higher deductibles. It's just a cash grab. And again, we saw the same thing going on when auto insurance was made mandatory. The premiums and deductibles went right through the roof to just guarantee immense profits for the auto insurance companies, who then dutifully shared a percentage of it with the government through taxes and, of course, heavy campaign donations to their favorite Congress critters. We're going to grab one more phone call before the commercial break. Bob in Florida. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike, had you ever thought about them using this shutdown to blame a catastrophic cyber attack on the banking system, and then take away people's assets and hide it because they're having troubles with their software?
Well, we've been talking about the possibility of a virtual 911 for quite some time to crash the entire system and basically blame it on Iran or Russia or China. But you're absolutely right. In such a cyber 911, all the accounts of private American citizens would simply vanish. And the banks would say, we don't know that you have that money with us. We're sorry. We can do nothing about that. And so I agree. It's a very real possibility.
Do you think that it would affect all the banks at once, or would they piecemeal it, this bank, that bank, the other bank?
No, because if it's a virtual 911 false flag, they'll hit everything all at the same time, because if they do it piecemeal to one bank, the customers of every other bank will start a run on those banks to empty out their savings accounts and safety deposit boxes. So it'll be everywhere at once.
So we could wake up one morning and all the banks will be zeros.
Yeah, we could. It's entirely possible. I mean, this government is just desperate enough to try anything. And again, our common sense advice to all of our listeners and readers, you should have no more in the banks than you need to cover your outstanding obligations, and you should have the rest at home under your own control, and part of it in physical silver and gold.
And if after the banks shut down, what good is, are people going to be arrested for having cash and trying to buy things in the local economy?
Well, I rather think at that point things will be so confused that the machinery to arrest people is pretty much going to be shattered anyway. It's going to be a difficult time, and again, something that people should be doing is, if you're investing in silver, is get what's called the junk silver, which are pre-1965 silver coins without numismatic value, just the melt value, because that's going to be a uniform unit of trade that people can rely on to conduct commerce before we get the new government up and running. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Obama is still up there speechifying, trying to put the blame on the GOP for being unreasonable about Obamacare and everything. And it's rather amazing, in that entire room of prostitutes and correspondents, not one of them has the courage to stand up and ask a simple question. Why, when the Constitution authorizes the central government to create and issue an interest-free public currency, is the government borrowing currency at interest from a privately owned bank? Bunch of cowards in that room. Of course, if you had any courage or spine, you get kicked out. That's what happened to Helen Thomas when she put Obama on the spot regarding Israel's nuclear weapons. Oh, you lose your White House press credentials if you dare ask a question like that. These people are in there. They're being paid these huge salaries to sit in that room and simply accept whatever Obama says and report it as the news. That's their job. Lying is big business in the United States of America, between the corporate media and public relations firms. It's the only part of our economy that's still working. Lying for money here. Alrighty, Ben Swan has just put up a new video over at his video venture. Many Americans suffering sticker shock. Is Obamacare really affordable? And he is detailing more and more instances of what we've already been reporting. People who are going in and enrolling in Obamacare are being presented with acceptable insurance packages with sky-high premiums, sky-high deductibles. And middle-class families who are going in there and being presented with these hideously expensive, virtually useless insurance policies are being told that they make too much money to qualify for any of the tax deductions or subsidies that are supposed to make this affordable in the first place. Alrighty, so I'm getting a confirmation from our control room. It looks like somebody is purposefully overloading RBN's streaming server because they don't want America to find out what's going on here. So at the conclusion of the show, today's broadcast will be available as a podcast. You can go to whatreallyhappened.com, look on the right-hand side. It says to most recent podcast. You can go in there, and you can send those files or that link to all of your friends in social media who wanted to listen to the show and could not, because somebody out there is playing dirty, and it's a measure of just how afraid they are that the truth is finally getting out. Let's grab a couple of phone calls here. Chris in Tennessee. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Chris, are you there?
Bob in Florida.
Okay. If Chris is not there, let's go to Jim in Alabama. Jim, are you there?
Hey. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. You're on the air. What's on your mind today?
Well, a couple things. First, I'm wondering if Americans are living abroad and have a residence or not even a residence in another country. Are they still obligated to participate in Obamacare?
Boy, that is a really, really good question, and I have not read the entire Obamacare legislation because it's a gigantic tome. But so far, I have not heard. Looking at the exemptions to Obamacare, I did not see Americans living in foreign countries on that list of exemptions. So I'm basically going to say at this point that no, they're still obligated to be part of it. And we've already hit the point right now where Americans living in other countries are just turning in their passports and renouncing their citizenship to get away from this out-of-control taxation and control.
Yeah. The other thing is, someone told me late last week, maybe it was Friday, that on CNN they had heard that the wonderful news that President Obama had reduced the deficit by 50%, and then again today in his speech, he also made the claim that since I've been president, I've reduced our deficit by 50%.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. We know they're rigging the unemployment numbers. We know they've been rigging the markets, rigging the LIBOR. There is no reason to take anything Obama is saying at face value because it's all creative bookkeeping. If he'd reduced the deficit by 50%, well, that didn't cure the deficit entirely, which is why we've slammed up against that that debt ceiling yet again. Reducing the deficit does not deal with the debt. It simply means they're going into debt a little bit slower than they were before, and that should not be touted as a success. In fact, it's an admission of failure.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just more of the mainstream media, I think, lies and deception. And the guy has got to know he's in big trouble. I mean, this presidency is undoubtedly the worst in our history. Undoubtedly worse than the Bushes.
Well, let's be fair to the guy. I mean, he inherited a mess that has been 100 years in the building. And every president tries to just paper it over, and they loot Social Security or whatever it is so that they can end their term in office looking good for the history books. But it was inevitable. There's going to be one president who's going to be president when it all comes apart. And it looks like it very well might be Obama. But to be fair to the guy, Obama didn't create this disaster. It was created for him.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, I know there are those in the black community who feel that he's being unjustly targeted and will be if the thing all unravels, as you say.
I disagree with that. I think most of the people in the black community are very disappointed in him, but it's the White House itself that's trying to put out this idea that opposition to Obama is based in racism, and that's complete nonsense. If we had a racist country, he wouldn't be president in the first place. Our opposition and our anger and frustration with Obama isn't based on who he is or what color he is or where he comes from. It is based on his actions as the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. And he is, in fact, continuing the Bush policy of doing everything for the benefit of the banks and Wall Street directly in opposition to what would work best for the American people themselves. He likes to liken himself as a new John Kennedy, and he certainly has the charm and the charisma and the speaking ability of a Kennedy, but it's a wasted potential because he doesn't have the courage of a John F. Kennedy to stand up to that private central bank and say enough is enough is enough.
Okay, well, You take care, and I'll keep listening, man.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Chris in Tennessee. Chris, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, Mike, I want to thank you for posting that story about the Oklahoma senator who wants to take away the people's Social Security disability in the state of West Virginia, and he's at work right now looking at people's medical records. That's right, folks, looking at your medical records to deny you any more future payment and to kick you off Social Security. You need to listen to the story that Mike's got on his website. Listen to the tape and read what this guy says. And he basically says, I don't have to worry about getting reelected, but I'm a senator now, and I have the power, and I'm going to pick on these people in West Virginia because they shouldn't get a check from the government. And I was just blown away by the tenacity of him. Why don't you senators cut your retirement benefits if you're so worried about money and balancing the budget, but yet you want to take away food and for people that are starving and they're not even in your state? It just blew me away, and it's going on right now today.
Well, there's a larger issue beyond that because everybody in the government who's screaming about cutting costs and everything, it's cutting costs to you, the American taxpayer. Now, the original model for this nation was that the purpose of government is to do for the community what the community needs but cannot organize for itself. The government is supposed to take that tax money and then spend it taking care of you, but they're spending it everywhere else except you. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm hearing that at least part of our RBN streaming service has now been restored, but it definitely looks like somebody's out there trying to overwhelm the server with a DOS attack because we're telling you something the government doesn't want you to think about. Like that question, why, when the Constitution authorizes the government to create and issue an interest-free public currency, is the government borrowing currency at interest from a privately owned bank? And they're terrified of that question because they don't have a decent answer for it. It's a scam. It's the same scam King George III imposed on the colonies with his Currency Act that led to the American Revolution. And we have been sold back into debt slavery to that same predatory banking system not once but 3 times by our corruptible and corrupted central government. We're going to grab a phone call here. Anthony in Texas. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Anthony, are you there? Anthony, are you there? Okay, I guess he's not paying attention, so we're going to let Anthony go, and maybe he'll come on back somewhere later. Needless to say, this backlash on the closing of the monuments, the national parks, the cutting off of services to the American people by the same government that is continuing to confiscate your wealth to spend it on Wall Street and the war machine and to pour all over Israel is provoking quite a lot of rage and anger. And over at Activist Post, they had an article, America's Path to Revolution is rapidly escalating, and I understand the sentiment. And they're talking about the 3 stages of a revolution. Step number 1, a minimum number of persecuted population becomes aware they're victims and share a collective consciousness with their fellow victimized citizens. 10% is the minimum number needed to successfully complete stage 1. 2, awareness leads to action in the form of civil disobedience, which is what we're seeing with the Occupy protest, the truckers' strike that's happening this weekend. And number 3, civil disobedience is met with opposing force by the power elite, and the conflict leads to open hostilities culminating in revolution. Now, I disagree with that third one, and I know we're on that path. But you need to understand that success in a revolution means not fighting the war the government is already prepared to fight and win, with all these armored cars and LRADs, all this ammunition they've been buying. The federal government is already well prepared to fight and win a war against the 50 states and the American people, and they paid for it with your money. And so my advice continues to be, and I know it is very hard, stay patient, stay calm, keep your money out of the banks, peaceful, non-cooperative, or non-violent, non-cooperation, and it's all going to come crashing down by itself. Success in revolution has always involved not fighting the war the other side is prepared to fight and win. That's what happened in Vietnam, happened in the American Revolution, happened in Afghanistan. The rigidity of the organized structure of the ruling force denies them the flexibility to deal with non-conventional approaches to revolution. And that will work this time as well. Did we ever get Anthony back?
No, not yet.
All right, apparently Anthony went off and did something else interesting. Now, I want to get on to some interesting stuff about education here. We have been talking, and you've probably been listening to Phyllis Schlafly at the beginning of the show, about how Common Core continues to erode the academic standards of our young people. Because schools are no longer about education in this country, they are about indoctrination. And apparently we are starting to reap the consequences as a society of this indoctrination over education that has been going on now for quite some time. Because there's this story we saw over at WTOP.com that in addition to America's school children failing to come up to the standards set by their international peers, now it turns out the vast majority of American adults don't either. In math, reading, and problem solving, using technology, all skills considered critical for global competitiveness and economic strength, American adults scored below the international average on the global test. Adults in Japan, Canada, Australia, Finland, and many other countries scored significantly higher than the United States. Now, one of the reasons is when a country drifts into a fascist dictatorship, they don't want a population able to think analytically and logically, which are essential to solving problems. They just want a population that will accept what they're told, believe in it, and recite it back. And that is good for the ruling class, but bad for the economy. And when you couple that with the fact that America's top scientists are leaving the country for friendlier territory, there is a major brain drain going on in this country, and it's another sign of the decline and fall of the American empire. Now, this story was very alarming. This was over at prisonplanet.com, and it's talking about 6th grade students at the Bryant School District in Arkansas were handed an assignment to revise the Bill of Rights, using the War on Terror and the Patriot Act as a guide. And the teachers were telling the students the government of the United States is currently revisiting the Bill of Rights. They have determined it is outdated and may not remain in its current form any longer. And you, the students, will decide of your own free will what amendments in the Bill of Rights should be taken out for the sake of the war on terror and national security. Now, that Bill of Rights does not belong to the United States government. It belongs to we the people, along with that entire Constitution. It says that right up at the very top, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, and so forth. The government does not have the right to change that Bill of Rights. The only way the Bill of Rights can be changed is with a new constitutional amendment passed by Congress, signed by the President, and ratified by 3/4 of the states. They are stealing your heritage from you, and they're doing it by targeting the most intellectually vulnerable segment of our society, school kids, 6th graders. They're going into school and being told the Bill of Rights is outdated. Pay no attention to that Bill of Rights. That's out of... We've got to come up with a new and improved Bill of Rights. And we already know what amendments they're talking about taking out. That Second Amendment's definitely going to go. That 10th Amendment is going to go. The 4th Amendment's going to go. They're brainwashing your children, using your tax money to brainwash your children into surrendering the protection of their rights against intrusive government. And you should be very angry about that. Now, I don't agree with Phyllis Schlafly about a lot of things that she says, but definitely with regards to Common Core, this is an attack on our children to basically dumb them down, to isolate them from the classics of literature that would get them thinking about current events. most of the reading requirements under Common Core are government propaganda handouts about human-caused global warming. We're right down in the same level as the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And it's right there. And if you're a parent, you ought to take a few minutes to sit down with your school kid and ask, what are you being taught in school about our Bill of Rights? What are you being taught in school about the founding of this nation and the nature of banking? And you may be in for a very, very rude shock. This government does not want intelligent, educated, rational citizens. They want obedient workers, obedient soldiers. People who know just enough to fill out the required government paperwork and do what they're told at the place of employment and otherwise not think at all. Just run off and watch America's Got whatever on TV and more of these reality shows and think that that represents culture and entertainment. Now, meanwhile, over in Syria, in compliance with the deal that Russia and the Syrian government worked out, international experts have already arrived to catalog and begin the process of dismantling Syria's chemical weapons arsenal. Now, given the brouhaha that the U.S. government was making over those vile chemical weapons in Syria, you would think they would tout this as a success, and they're not. The official U.S. policy is, big deal. We don't care. It's no big deal that he's getting rid of his chemical weapons. Because the agenda still is to find an excuse to invade Syria, get rid of Assad, put in a U.S. puppet regime, and open the door to the eventual war with Iran. That's what's going on here. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And did Anthony ever come back, or I guess he's not paying attention?
No, he never called back.
He never called back. Okay, so we're talking about Syria, and we're talking about the attempt by Russia and Syria to basically evade further U.S. military adventurism. And now they're talking about a possibility of a peace conference called Geneva II between the government of Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian National Coalition. Now, the Syrian National Coalition, though, is coming into Geneva II saying they're setting conditions ahead of time. They want guarantees that their demands will be met up front. And this is a negotiating tactic to guarantee nothing will happen. We have seen that with Israel over the last several years. Yes, we'll talk with the Palestinians as long as up front they agree to recognize Israel as the Palestinian state and do everything we want, and then we'll talk with them about maybe doing something nice for them in return, which never happens. So they're trying to derail the possibility of peace. They're trying to trivialize and minimize the fact that Assad is, in fact, allowing his chemical weapons to be destroyed. And by the way, the reason he had those chemical weapons was as a balance to Israel's nuclear arsenal. Now, BBC got caught faking some of their Syria coverage. We have this, including the video, linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And they're showing a clip of a British medic, Dr. Rola Hallam, on the ground in Syria. And in the original clip, she says that it looks like these people were hit with napalm. Now, she's wearing a surgical mask, so you cannot actually see her mouth. And in the version that BBC aired, the word napalm is replaced with chemical weapon. And they got caught on it. So they're still trying to lie to you and sell this whole idea of chemical weapons. And remember, the United Nations Chemical Weapon Inspection Team basically admitted that even though some of the victims provided to them by the hired mercenary army did test positive for exposure to sarin, they were unable to detect any sarin at the location of that August 21st attack. Now, Abe Foxman over at the Anti-Defamation League is going around screaming that nobody should ever implicate Israel in what was going on in Syria, even though Israel's so-called intelligence was cited as the go-to source for the claim that Assad had gassed his own people. And so Israel has come under severe criticism, and Abe Foxman is out there saying that anybody who says that Israel had anything to do with Syria, they're just being anti-Semites. Of course, last week when the Pew Research poll found that the majority of American Jews are having serious doubts about Israel's government's policies, Abe Foxman was saying they were anti-Semites. That's all he knows how to say anymore. You're an anti-Semite. Yeah. And he gets a lot of money for that, too, here. Now, we're coming up on the new P5+1 talks regarding Iran. That agenda is back out there. Netanyahu is screaming, you got to kill them for us. And everybody is saying, please shut up. Israel's been screaming that Iran is on the verge of a nuclear weapon going back to 1985, and they haven't had it yet. And Iran is just not in the habit of invading and attacking other countries. They haven't done it in 200 years. So John Kerry, obeying his Israeli masters, is going into the P5+1 talk saying there are no new proposals on the table. That Iran has to respond to the old proposal of give up all of your nuclear technology or else. And so they are setting the stage for this P5+1 to accomplish absolutely nothing, because that's what they want, because the real agenda is war on Syria, war on Iran, eventual war on the rest of the Mideast, to conquer all those nations so that that oil is for sale only for U.S. dollars, to prop up the petrodollar deal. When you go back and you look at all wars are bankers' wars, that's the agenda. America was enslaved to this public currency as private for-profit scam 100 years ago. And what the Federal Reserve Act did to enslave you, the American people, Bretton Woods did to the rest of the world. And the American people and the rest of the world are trying to break free, and the U.S. is trying to reimpose this form of debt servitude by force of arms, and that is the top agenda. Everything else is just a sideshow. Saddam's nukes, Assad's gas, Iran's nukes. It's just window dressing. The real agenda is to conquer the world and re-enslave it back to private central banking. Now, the other day we were commenting about all these timelines about Iran that were coming out in things like Time magazine, and they all start with the 1979 revolution and how Iran has been our enemy ever since. And they avoided talking about the 1953 U.S.-sponsored coup d'etat that took down the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh and imposed the Shah of Iran. And likewise, the New York Times, once again, as it waxes eloquent about the potential threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon, fails to mention that Israel, the country doing all the war threatening in the region, is the world's 6th largest nuclear power. They are producing an estimated 10 to 15 plutonium-type bombs every year. But apparently over at the New York Times, Israel's nuclear weapons are good, and anybody else's nuclear weapons are bad, and they've got to be opposed because only the U.S. and Israel are allowed to have nuclear weapons to threaten the world. We're going to take a phone call here. Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I think Israel should take Ian Coulter's advice that radioactivity, a little bit of it's not a bad thing for people.
Well, they're probably already having to do that because that facility at Dimona, where they have the bomb factory underneath, because nobody's allowed to go near it because of all the secrecy, it's developed leaks. It's been leaking radioactivity into the groundwater for quite some time. So, yeah, there's already a health issue there.
Listen, Mike, I just got done watching our moron-in-chief on his press conference, and I cannot... when you have time, I'd watch it because you will not believe what he says in there. He talks about the Republicans holding the budget hostage for the debt ceiling talks, and he says, I'm paraphrasing, but this is close to what he said. He said, holding our budget hostage is like a worker saying he's not going to go to work unless he gets the vacation he wants. And I thought to myself, this is my Democratic Party? This is the party of unions, liberal unions? This guy's an idiot. He totally wasted liberal ideology in one sentence.
Well,
plus,
ideology goes before conscripted income, and that's what this is all about, grabbing more money from the American people to prop up this Ponzi scheme central bank just a little longer. Obama's objective here is to have it still somewhat together when he leaves office and he goes into the history books as having managed a difficult situation and the war on terror, and whoever gets the Oval Office next gets to eat the verdict of history when it all falls apart. But I don't think he's going to make it to the end of his term. I think this government and this banking system are going to be gone imminently.
Well, I think he tried to clean it up later in another sentence, saying he tried to add on, well, it'd be like burning down the factory, because he realized he had opened his big mouth and shot his whole Democratic Party in the foot.
Well, I wasn't. Go ahead.
If I could just finish just one point,
yeah.
I'll be quick. He said it'd be like burning down the factory if you don't get what you want. And I thought to myself, that's your policy with Syria, for crying out loud.
Was their policy with Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's their policy with the national monuments and the national parks here. If we don't get what we want, you don't get to play with your property.
At some point, we're allowed to use our critical thinking, and it seems like when these people address us, it's like they're addressing a bunch of morons who don't know how to think. I mean,
that's what they think of us.
Hole.
That's what they think of us. They are still operating from that Cold War mindset of the 1950s and 1960s, when the American public were dangerously naive and very trusting and would simply accept whatever they were told and believe it. But those days and those naive Americans are gone forever, and they still don't get it inside Washington, D.C., which is why everything that they're doing right now backflashes on them so badly. We got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly commercial. Scott, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 3 of our show. And apparently, at least part of our RBN streams are now restored, despite what appears to have been a DOS attack to try and keep people from tuning into the show. And I have to wonder, what is it I'm saying that has struck such fear into the heart of the government? And I think it's that question that I've been asking every day on my show, and I just reprised it to the front page of my website. The Constitution gives the central government the legal authority to create and issue an interest-free public currency. Why then is it going to a privately owned bank to borrow that currency at interest, plunging the American people into hopelessly unpayable debt, leading to this current hysteria over raising a debt ceiling that should not even exist to begin with? All righty, we're going to take a phone call here. Bob in New Jersey. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Keep up the good work. A little info on the Iran situation back there at the time they overthrew the Shah. I'm sure you're aware that the British lease, which was paying the Iranian people peanuts, it was forced on them after the First World War at the point of a gun. The Shah wanted them to renew the lease, but he wanted more money, and BP offered him less. So the Shah threatened to nationalize the oil. So the BBC started piping in the Ayatollah. The Shah asked for equal time. BBC refused. Meanwhile, the MI6 was funding and training the opponents of the Shah, and the CIA, unbeknownst to Jimmy Carter, was also training the secret police. So it all came to a head when they overthrew him. It was basically engineered by the West to get rid of the Shah. You can't have your own oil and expect your own money.
Well, that's always what it's really been about. One of the reasons for the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I into these little tiny arbitrary shapes was in order to keep them controllable, in order to keep siphoning out the oil at very, very cheap prices, keep the Arab people fighting amongst themselves to keep them under control.
Yeah.
And every time you see a leader rise in that area that has the potential to unite the entire region, he has to be destroyed, whether it's Saddam Hussein or Ahmadinejad or now Rouhani. It was one of the reasons that they were absolutely opposed over in Egypt to Morsi, because he was standing up to the U.S. and Israel, and the whole region was saying, okay, here's a guy who can take our part of the world and move it forward into the future.
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what we're doing.
All righty. Yep. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing there, Mikey?
Doing good.
Hey, you know what, Mike? I got to give kudos to that Scott out in Virginia. He's awake, and I love that brother for saying that, but I'll explain it a different way what he was saying. James says a double-minded man is a stumbling block. And what that means is it's called lying and deceiving. And I'll tell you what, the meek and the humble, like you and me, Mike, and the guys that are awake, and I'm not talking about nighttime, we're not going to be lied to and deceived because we know what's coming out of the mouth of our fearless leader. So I just wanted to share that. And, Mike, thanks for taking my call. And aloha.
Aloha yourself here, and thank you very much. And now joining us on the air is Donna Leframboy. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She has a new book out on the IPCC, which is worthy of consideration, even as they're still out there trying to scream that, yes, there's been no warming for 16 years, but the warming is coming. It's hiding in the ocean. It's hiding under the mattress, and you've got to buy carbon credits and pay carbon taxes. And Donna, thank you for spending time with us today. First of all, did I pronounce your last name correctly? And then tell us about your new book.
You were very, very close. La Framboise.
La Framboise. Okay.
Perfect.
Merci.
My new book is called Into the Dustbin, and it takes a very close look at the gentleman who has been heading the IPCC, that UN climate body, for since 2002. So he's been
guy
around
who
for a while.
drives trains. The guy who used to drive trains.
Well, he's a railroad engineer. I'm not sure how much driving he did, but yes, that is his background. It is railroad engineering, and somehow he got promoted and is discussed by the media as if he is the world's foremost climate scientist. I'm not sure how you get from railway engineer to climate scientist, but that's what's happened with this gentleman. So my book is, I have a previous book which is called The Delinquent Teenager Who Was Mistaken for the World's Top Climate Expert, and that book is about the IPCC in general as an organization, and it turns out that a great many things that we've been told about the IPCC simply aren't true. And it appears that I'm the very first journalist in the world to actually do some very basic fact-checking. So that was my first book. It's 2 years old, and the one that's just come out in the last few weeks, Into the Dustbin, focuses on the man who's been in charge of the IPCC. So one's kind of the big picture, and one is more on the leader, because it might not be wise to judge a book by its cover, but it is very appropriate to judge an organization by its leader and how that leader behaves. And if you take a spotlight and you shine it on this gentleman, you find just he's a disgrace. He's a disgrace. He says all sorts of things about his organization that are not true. He's an amazing guy. He has claimed for years to have earned 2 PhDs. He only recently corrected that and said, the college made a mistake and they gave me 2 diplomas, so that's why I thought I had 2 PhDs. 5 years ago, when the IPCC shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore, he quite wrongly, quite mistakenly, told the thousands of scientists who've been involved with the IPCC over 25 years that they were all Nobel laureates. Well, that was wrong too. But this gentleman, practically every time he opens his mouth, he says something that's downright wrong. And if that's the case, what should we think about his organization if it's being led by this sort of person?
Well, it's obviously a political organization. It was never a scientific one. We found out from other sources that the IPCC, in granting out research grants to scientists, basically constrained the research by saying, assuming there are no other factors, demonstrate how human activity increases global temperature. We know there's been an immense amount of fraud. Al Gore himself is not a climate scientist. In fact, he did very poorly in his science courses, required science courses in college. We have him on videotape saying that the temperature of the Earth's core is millions of degrees. He's off by several zeros. We know here we are 10, 12 years on, none of the dire forecasts that the carbon Nazis were making come to pass. 10 years ago, it was being reported in the media snow would be a thing of the past. We've had several record-setting winters since then. We just had a record snowstorm in the Dakotas over the last few days, and it looks like we're going to have a really, really hard winter because solar activity is now at a 100-year low. And this thing was all about acquiring money. We know that Al Gore set up his carbon exchange with the assistance of Ken Lay of Enron. And the plan was obviously to do to planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron did to California with electricity. We have to take a break for some commercials here. We're going to be back with Donna and her book and the IPCC and looking at all the reasons why this is an organization you should not trust. We'll be right back. And we are talking with Donna Laframboise about her new book, Into the Dustbin, and I apologize for butchering your last name.
No, it's perfect.
That was perfect. Okay. And we're talking about the IPCC, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has been the focal point of trying to sell this absolute nonsense of human-caused global warming to the world, even as the world demonstrably is getting cooler. It led to that whole ClimateGate scandal, where emails and computer code were leaked out of the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, which documented they were doctoring the numbers. They were literally writing into the computer code, adding temperature as the years went on to create that hockey stick, to scare us all into agreeing to a global carbon tax and global submission to a global environmental authority, and it was all a huge, gigantic fraud. And now, of course, every scientist and organization and agency and institution that signed on to this, they're struggling to salvage their reputations because people are just looking out their windows at the obvious signs that it didn't happen. And you would think if global warming were the real agenda, that all of these people would say, see, it worked. We succeeded. We defeated global warming, and they would go off to other ventures. But because the real agenda is to sucker you into buying carbon credits and get you to pay carbon taxes, which, like Obamacare, it's just a cash grab by a government desperate for money to get out of this mess they've created. They're still out there saying, oh, no, even though there hasn't been any warming in 16 years, we know it's coming. It's hiding in the bottom of the ocean. It's hiding under the Antarctica ice. And, yes, they've actually really come out and said these things here. So, Donna, would you tell us some of the things you found about IPCC and its leader that would call into question the credibility of this whole human-caused global warming?
Well, one of the things is that we're told that the IPCC is an organization of scientists who are conducting a scientific assessment and that they are rigorous and they are neutral and they are impartial. If that were the case, why would the leader of this organization be writing forewords for Greenpeace publications? Okay, if the IPCC is this neutral scientific body that weighs the evidence in a very even-handed way, it's kind of like a trial. And Rajendra Pachauri at the head of it is kind of like the chief judge in a murder trial. Well, can you imagine if the judge went and, had lunch with the prosecution team, while this trial was going on? Rajendra Pachauri writes forewords for Greenpeace publications, more than one foreword for Greenpeace publication, and for many other activist organizations
well,
as well.
Well, if I could insert a comment here right now, one of the reasons the IPCC has been scandalized is taking advocacy articles from very obvious biased publications and presenting them as real confirmed science. The scream about the Himalaya glaciers melting turned
exactly.
out, and we know that those people who are supporting the global warming agenda are receiving very generous scientific funding. We know that scientists who are questioning the orthodoxy are blacklisted for funding. Their tenure comes under attack. We know that the so-called peer review process has been subverted to the point where anybody writing an article, no matter how scientifically rigorous, that challenges that orthodoxy, it just does not get published in those journals. Thankfully, of course, it does get published here in the independent media. It is very clearly biased in favor of selling this political agenda, and that's what it is. It's not science, it's a political agenda. Now, in a real rational world, we would expect the science to drive the public policy, but clearly we have a case here where the policy is warping the science. I come out of a science background myself, and we were always familiar with the golden rule of science. Whoever's handing out the gold tells you what the science is going to be.
Yes, yes. And, I started researching the global warming debate about 4 years ago. And at that time, I was annoyed that the media coverage was so one-sided. And I thought there has to be more to the story than this. So, but it was not obvious to me 4 years ago. I had a very open mind that, what's going on? Is it politics driving the science? That was not a foregone conclusion to me. I had to do a number of years of research and look very carefully at the evidence and look very carefully at the public record before I arrived at that conclusion. And, I think there is a great deal of data to support that conclusion. It's not just, people thinking, oh, there's a conspiracy. That there is a great deal of evidence that points in the direction that many of the people working with the IPCC do have this political agenda. And for many of them, it's almost unconscious. They just see the world in a particular way, and they assume that that's the only way and the right way to see the world. So, right now, we have a number of people writing this IPCC report. Part 1 was released a couple weeks ago. Parts 2 and 3 are going to be released in the spring. And so it's still ongoing, and some of the people who are working on this new report, they are former employees of the World Wildlife Fund. Okay, that's the biggest, most powerful, wealthiest environmental group on the planet. And, they're not just about wildlife. They're the people who bring us Earth Hour every year, where you're supposed to turn off your lights for an hour. Mm-hmm. So one of the gentlemen who is now working on the IPCC report, he used to be a WWF vice president. And another woman who's working on the report at the moment, she used to be their chief climate change spokesperson. She was their media spokesperson. Now, as far as I can tell, this woman, her name is Jennifer Morgan, she does not have any science background, no science background whatsoever. What is she doing a million miles? Within a million miles of the IPCC. If this is a scientific organization, why did they recruit her to work on this report?
No, it isn't. But basically what they're doing, you know of the Hegelian dialectic, which is you create a problem out of thin air, and then you offer to sell the people a solution, and that we've seen that for all kinds of politicians for a lot of years. They take something that happens naturally, climate change, which is climate is always changing, declare it to be an emergency, and then say, we will save you from it if you give us your obedience and your money and you buy our carbon credits. And it's just a flat-out economic and political scam. And it is amazing how much information has surfaced in the independent media that just calls this orthodoxy into question, and yet the promoters of it are still out there trying to sell this whole thing. They got this part 1 of this latest report out there. We know that the preliminary version of that report admitted there had actually been no warming at all. We got reports that various governments around the world and various agencies like NASA and NOAA were begging the IPCC to take that out because they have bet their reputations on this global warming hysteria, and Mother Nature has basically flipped them the bird, and the world is clearly getting much, much colder. We had record Arctic ice extent growth this last year, and Mother Nature's just not going along with the plan, but they're still trying to find some way they can keep pushing this agenda by saying that the global warming is hiding somewhere in the bottom of the ocean. And we're coming up on another commercial break, and I've decided I'd like to keep you into our next segment so we don't have to rush on this thing. But we're hearing all this talk about how the Earth's oceans aren't actually rising. We know that a lot of the more recent material coming out of the global warming is that the global warming is hiding in the ocean, which in the deep, which is nonsense. Hot water will rise and cold water will descend. But the point I keep trying to make to people when they talk about how the Earth's oceans are being warmed by human activity, how many active undersea volcanoes and thermal vents are there on the floor of the world's oceans? And don't feel embarrassed if you can't answer. It's a trick question. Nobody knows. And until you know how much heat is added to the oceans from these undersea active volcanoes and thermal vents, you cannot begin to calculate what the human contribution is supposed to be. But the way the IPC set it up was pretend there are no other factors and then document how human activity is warming the world. And so it was never a real-world scientific investigation. It was decision support. Come up with numbers and charts that sell the point. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with Donna and Into the Dustbin after these few words. And aloha, welcome back to the show. We're talking with Donna Laframboise about her new book, Into the Dustbin, and I just posted the link to the Amazon site where you can purchase her book to my website, so you can go in there and take a look at it. And Donna, we got an email over the break from a listener. I would like to hear Donna and yourself talk about the education system co-opting the minds of our 20 and 30-somethings about global warming, climate change when they were in school. Also, if possible, I would like to hear Donna's view on my personal Canadian nightmare, Mr. Maurice Strong. I would also like Donna's perspective on Lord Christopher Monckton. And before I turn the mic over to you, Donna, we know that one of the major arguments against this new Common Core educational curriculum in the United States is that reading of the literary classics is being de-emphasized, and the reading requirement is focusing primarily on government-issued propaganda, including human-caused global warming. We know that's a huge, huge part of our current public school indoctrination to convince the kids global warming is real, and they're going to have to spend their lives paying carbon taxes to atone for the damage they're inflicting on planet Earth.
Well, you know, I too am concerned about what students are being taught in school. You know, when I was young, and my teachers sat me down and showed me a film that said that by the time I was grown up, there would be no forests left in the world because of all the acid rain. And, you know, it was a pretty scary idea, but it turned out that they were wrong. You know, so the school system, going way back to the post-war Cold War era, has always scared our children. You know, hide under your desk in case of a nuclear bomb, as
like
if that's
actually going to work. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I got the same thing when I was, you know, the commies are bad, the commies are evil, beware of communist subversion. And basically I'm at the age right now where I realize that pretty much everything I was taught in public school turned out to be completely bogus. You know, in the 1970s, they were screaming there was a new ice age coming, and we understand the mechanism. If you're a scientist and you publish a report that says, I found this interesting phenomenon and it probably doesn't mean anything, you don't get media attention, you don't get funding. But if you find something and you say, it's the end of the world, then the media comes in and the funding comes in, and you get your time on the Discovery Channel. And that's a big part of what drives sensationalist science, whether it's Y2K or killer bees or the coming ice age or global warming. And it really distorts the public perception of the value of science and the scientific method.
That's right. And, you know, it's always something, right? It's overpopulation, or it's the ozone layer, or it's global cooling, or it's global warming. And, you know, children, especially when they get to be teenagers, they do one thing pretty universally, and that's that they rebel. And they develop actually some pretty interesting skepticism toward what they're being told by authority figures.
Only they could hang on to that.
So, you know, I choose to be very optimistic about young people. I think they can see dogma when it's right in front of their noses, and I think they will make up their own mind, and with or without the school system's assistance. So, you know, I have concern, but on the other hand, I try to be optimistic, and I think that you know, children are pretty good at realizing when they're being fed a political line. You know, eventually when they reach their teens at least. So now I'm trying to remember what your email correspondent said.
I wanted to know your opinion on Maurice Strong up in Canada and your opinion on Lord Christopher Monckton.
Okay. Well, both of those gentlemen are are not my area of specialties.
Okay.
I know that Maurice Strong was the first head of the UN Environmental Program, and he was the person who decided that it was a very good idea to get lots of NGOs like Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund very involved in the UN's environmental issues, and I think that was a big mistake. But I don't know a lot about Maurice Strong, and so I think it would be wrong for me to make too many comments in that regard. And with respect to Christopher Monckton, pretty much the same thing. I've had the pleasure of meeting him very briefly in person. I have seen him give a marvelous talk on one occasion, and one that what didn't quite impress me so much on another occasion. He's a very smart man, and he can be an incredibly impressive speaker. And I think he has, like many of us, helped encourage people to think for themselves about climate, and so that's a very positive thing.
Okay, now I've already linked to your Amazon page for your book. Do you have another website about your writings on the IPCC and the global warming fraud?
Yes, I have a blog. Now let me tell, this is an interesting little story, and it won't take too long. When I started writing, I thought, the media is really one-sided here. And it didn't take me long at all in my research to realize that there was another side, and that's that there were very experienced, very credentialed, very impressive scientists who did not necessarily believe that we were all going to turn into a fireball because of global warming. And I was very annoyed that those people weren't getting any media attention, because as a journalist, I think it's my job to tell people what's happening in the world, to expose them to all sorts of information, and it's the public's job to then make a decision based on a wide exposure of information. I don't think it's my job as a journalist to choose sides, to say this group of people is correct about a very important issue, and those people there are incorrect. You just don't have the right to do that, and certainly I don't have a science background. Most journalists don't have a science background. How could you possibly be making that decision on behalf of the public? So my original website was called noconsensus.org. And then as I continued my research, I got so irritated that people kept saying there's a consensus, which really meant that they were pretending that all those other dissident scientists didn't exist. So I started a blog, and so my website was called noconsensus.org, and my blog is called No Fracking Consensus, because by then I was really exasperated by people trying to pretend that alternative points of view did not exist. So I blog at nofrackingconsensus.com, and actually there's a tab right up on the top of that website that says books. And if you click on that tab, you will find that you can order my book as a PDF as well. If you don't want to pay shipping charges, if you don't have a Kindle, but you do have an iPad, for example, you can order a PDF, and you can download it instantly, and there's no waiting, and there's no muss, and there's no fuss, and so that's just another option if you want to take a look at my book.
Okay, would you spell that domain for me, because I was trying to link to it while you were talking, and I'm getting... I'm not finding the server.
Okay, N-O, and fracking is F-R-A-K-K-I-N-G.
That's my mistake.
Consensus.com.
Okay, now I'm getting to it. All right, well, I'm going to put that up at whatreallyhappened.com. Anyway, the issue here, of course, Michael Crichton, who wrote a very wonderful novel called State of Fear, regarding this whole hysteria about global warming, basically came out and said if it's consensus, it isn't science, and if it's science, it isn't consensus. And this idea of waving consensus around is a way of trying to say, well, if the majority of people believe in this thing, the majority are always right, therefore they must be right. But history has always shown us that in science, the majority are often wrong, because before the majority can be right, one person has to be right, and while that one person stands alone being right, the majority are absolutely wrong. Back in the time of Galileo, the consensus was Earth was the center of the universe and everything moved around it. Obviously, consensus science didn't work out there, and it's certainly not working out here either.
That's right. And anyone who believes in consensus science, I have one word for them: Pluto. Remember when the consensus in science was that Pluto was a planet? And then suddenly one day, the consensus opinion was it's not a planet. You know, science is about the evolution of ideas. As we get more information, our ideas about the world change. That's a good thing.
Well, you're absolutely right. We're almost at the end of the segment here. I'm going to have to let you go. But in the absence of warming, real scientists would say we have to re-examine the theory of human-caused global warming. Politicians and scammers keep right on selling the same snake oil. Donna, got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for spending time on the show today. Good luck, and let's stay in touch. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Not a stellar day on the stock market. The Dow ended down minus 159, and it's now well and truly back in the 14,000s. That has to be making investors a little bit nervous. John Boehner got up for his inning after Obama and basically deflected criticism that this is all somehow the fault of the Republicans, and it isn't. It's the fault of the Republicans and the Democrats and Wall Street. It's a systemic problem because we have a government which has the legal authority under the Constitution to create and issue interest-free public currency, but instead chooses to borrow the public currency at interest from a privately owned bank, therefore plunging the American people and future generations into hopelessly unpayable debt to enslave you. Latest word from the so-called shutdown, which is just all being orchestrated to have maximum propaganda impact on the people. As you're probably aware, the Grand Canyon, along with all the other national parks, was shut down. Apparently, a group in Arizona secured private funding to open and operate the Grand Canyon on private funding only, and the federal government said, no, you're not allowed to do that. We are shutting down the Grand Canyon to get the American people to accept increased debt on their lives, and you will not open up that national park out of your own wallet. And again, those national parks and those monuments are the property and heritage of we, the American people. The government is the hired janitor to keep the parking lots painted, the trash emptied, the restrooms operating. And if the government doesn't want to do the job we pay them to do, they can leave, but they do not have a legal authority to shut us out of our own property. They are doing it to spook you into accepting a higher debt ceiling and this disaster called Obamacare. Speaking of which, even Fox News is now acknowledging. The polls are showing an overwhelming majority of Americans saying at the very least Obamacare should be delayed a year to work out all the obvious problems. Nobody even knows how many people have successfully signed up. They're just dealing with all these horrible, horrible problems. And by the way, if you are attempting to enroll in Obamacare, when you go over to those various websites at the state exchanges and the national exchange at healthcare.gov, you're presented with this little privacy policy notification in really, really fine type, and you have to click it off before you're allowed to proceed. And most people don't read those things any more than they read the end-user license agreement that is in there. But you need to read this one, because apparently buried in the privacy guarantees of Obamacare is an exception, that Obamacare can share your private personal medical data with law enforcement and the IRS's audit division. In other words, when you're telling Obamacare about your possible accident with an illicit substance, the police are going to be notified you're using illegal drugs. It's another reason why you should just not get involved with this. They make a big deal about privacy, but they're not actually keeping your information private. They're sharing it with other government agencies, and no doubt the pharmaceutical industry is going to get it for targeted marketing. Now, over at Fukushima, once again, the cooling systems have stopped. Now, these are the cooling systems. Those spent reactor fuel rods continue to generate heat from the decay of fission byproducts, and they must be kept cooled or they will spontaneously combust. And that cooling system has once again broken down, and they've got yet another typhoon on its way in. And they're not the only place, because apparently there is a reactor in Great Britain down at the Devonport dockyard where the primary and secondary power sources for nuclear cooling fuel shut down without explanation. They kept it secret, kept a lid on it, because everybody was all concerned about, all of a sudden it looked like all of our nuclear facilities were extremely fragile. And they came very, very close to losing control of this reactor when both the primary and secondary cooling systems quit working. My advice to those people running this British reactor is immediately seize the memory from those Siemens controllers, which are ubiquitous across the globe in nuclear power plants and in factories, and look for evidence of the Stuxnet malware, because this malware, crafted by the United States and Israel, was intended to target and destroy Iran's civilian nuclear power infrastructure, but it escaped into the wild, caused havoc all over Asia and the rest of the world, was known to have infected computers around the Fukushima power plant prior to the quake and tsunami, and may have well been inside, which would explain why many of their emergency systems failed to operate correctly when things started to go bad. If this Stuxnet has infected nuclear power plants all around the world, these are all major disasters waiting to happen. And I don't care how embarrassing it is to the United States and Israel, the operators of these nuclear plants have to be examining the memory of those Siemens controllers and make sure this malware is not in there. Let's see, over in Baghdad, more bombings there, 65 killed, 203 wounded. Apparently some of the troops in Iraq are still using those so-called improvised explosive device detectors that are actually joke golf ball finders that were sold by that guy who got thrown in jail. Afghanistan civilian deaths are up 16% according to the United Nations. Hamid Karzai, El Presidente de Unocal, only has about another 6 months in office, I think. He's out there screaming, after 12 years of U.S. occupation, this is not working. It is time for the U.S. to get out of Afghanistan and let the Afghan government take care of the nation the way they think is best. More clashes across Egypt. They're very unhappy with having had Morsi taken down by what is now obviously a covert counter-revolution to put a U.S. and Israeli-friendly government back into power. So the blood is spilling all over there. Let's see. America's police are looking more and more like the military. Certainly that's true. That was certainly shown to us with the D.C. driver. We are getting yet again confirmation. The woman who was shot and killed by the D.C. police, Miriam Carey, had been on prescription antidepressants for postpartum depression, was in the process of withdrawing from them, tapering down. And if you go over to ssristories.com, you will find out when you are coming off those medications is the time of greatest risk for extreme psychological behavior, including violence and suicide. And we have another case where a grandmother, apparently without any explanation at all, killed her own baby granddaughter with a sledgehammer. And I want to know what medication she was on. These medications are dangerous. But hey, they make money, so a smashed up baby, that's a small price to pay to make our stockholders happy next quarter. Just gets really crazy. All right, we're almost out of time, and I'm going to stop rushing through the talking points. I want to go back to that question that I keep asking, and you have to ask. And maybe it's the question that triggered that denial of service attack on the RBN servers earlier today, which is now over, thankfully. The Constitution, and you've got to make this viral on your social media, email list, everybody you know. You've got to ask this one question. The Constitution gives the legal authority to the U.S. government to create and issue an interest-free public currency. Why then has the government for 100 years been borrowing the public currency at interest from a privately owned central bank, plunging the American people and future generations into hopelessly unpayable debt. If we had an honest money system operating in this country, the money system this nation started with, there would be no debate over raising the debt ceiling. That's the question the federal government is most afraid of the American people answering because they don't have a good, or the American people asking because they don't have a good answer for it. 100 years ago, Congress and the President sold out to those private bankers to sell us back into the slavery of the very same banking scam we fought a revolution to be free of. We've got to make this the top question in the debate over the debt ceiling. We'll be back here tomorrow. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. We're having to spend our precious resources fending off these DOS attacks. And aloha, America.